Our message this evening is brought from the book of Job, chapter 25 through chapter 26. Bildad'S third discourse and Job's answer, part 1. A tongue set on fire. Billy Sunday, the noted evangelist of the early 20th century, was once approached by a talkative woman who tried to justify the quickness of her own tongue by saying, "It soon passes, it's over with quickly." To which Sunday replied, "So is a shotgun blast." Yes, the devastation of a quick tongue may pass quickly, but it also harms quickly. John Wesley was once approached by a young lady who said, "I think I know what my talent is." Wesley said, "Tell me." Without hesitation, she replied, "I think it is to speak my mind." Wesley said, "I do not think God would mind if you bury that talent." Anyone who speaks his mind running roughshod over others should bury his tongue before others are buried by it. This is what Job had been facing. He was subject to attack by the quick tongue of friends who had not hesitated to speak their mind. Rather than speaking with sensitivity to Job, they spoke with the subtlety of a shotgun blast. The rest of these tongue lashings were soul-jarring for Job, leaving him reeling under its force. Rather than helping Job, they reloaded and fired their verbal ammunition with renewed intensity. That's what's been going on now for some 20 chapters. And this 25th chapter contains Bildad'S final speech. In this debate, there's been 3 rounds. This is the 3rd round. Eliphaz is finished, and now Bildad is next. And we find that Zophar didn't step up to the bar on the 3rd round. They had to replace him, and we'll find out in a few more weeks who that was. But Bildad's speech was brief, but he held nothing back. This short, pithy lecture may indicate that Job's 3 friends were running out of argument and accusations. Also, the absence of a 3rd speech by Zophar indicates that their one-sided arguments were finally running out. What is remarkable about Bildad's final speech is that everything he said here is true. Job could not disagree with a word that Bildad spoke, and neither would we. He stated the sovereignty of God and the sinfulness of man in clearest terms. The problem with Bildad's speech was not so much with what he said, but in what he did not say. Bildad spoke of man's depravity, but he forgot to offer God's grace. When the Bible speaks of human depravity, it also offers a way of salvation, something Bildad failed to do. He brought bad news, but neglected to bring good news. His words also lacked love. And first we come to Bildad's 3rd discourse, verses 1 and 2. Then answered Bildad the Shuhite and said, "Dominion and fear are with him. He maketh peace in his high places." So Bildad was has an excellent notion of God, which is good. Then verse 3, "Is there any number of his armies, and upon whom doth not his light arise?" In up-to-date English, "Whom doth not his light pass?" In other words, God is the supreme one. Verse 4, "How then can man be justified with God? Or how can he be clean that is born of woman? Now here's a good question. Because every person born since the fall of Adam and Eve are born with a fallen nature. It is a question he should have asked at the beginning. Although he has asked the right question, Bildad doesn't have the right answer. Verse 5, Behold, even to the moon, and it shineth not. Yea, the stars are not pure in his sight. Well, we've been to the moon now, haven't we? And we found that it's a pretty dirty place. It's covered with dust and dirt, volcanic ash. Not a nice place to have a picnic. It's not as romantic up there as it is down here when the moon is shining and you're out with your girl on the first date. Mars seems to be no cleaner. The stars are not pure in his sight. Now, how would we have known that? Those many thousands of years ago, if God had not told us in the book of Job. We're just now finding that out. And then verse 6, how much less man that is a worm, and the Son of Man which is a worm. There are those who don't like to face that. People today talk about us having come from a worm. We haven't come from a worm. We are worms. That's what we are now in God's sight. How can a man who is born of woman be clean in God's sight? That's the question. And it's a good question. It's the supreme question. Bildad did not have the answer. Only the Lord Jesus Christ has the answer to that question. Place your faith in him, and you will change from a worm in God's sight to one of his children. And not only do we have Bildad's discourse, but Job's answer in verses 1 through 14 of chapter 26. Augustine of Hippo, noted as Augustine the Great, was a great thinker and a theologian. He was once walking along a beach, perplexed by the incomprehensible truth of the Trinity. Trying as he might, he simply could not grasp the vast truth of the triune nature of one God who exists eternally in three persons. Because he could not fully understand it, he was tempted to reject it. Augustine continued to walk along the shoreline until he came upon a little boy playing on the beach. As he watched, he saw the child run to the ocean with a seashell, fill it with water, and then return to pour it into a small hole he had dug in the sand. "What are you doing, little man?" asked Augustine. "Oh," replied the boy, "I'm trying to put the ocean into this hole." Augustine smiled at the little boy's faith. Such a task was impossible even for the greatest of men. Then finally it struck him. He was guilty of actually the same futile act. "That's what I'm trying to do with God," he confessed. "Standing on the shores of time, I'm trying to get the infinite things of God into my little finite mind, and it just won't fit." This was the deepening realization to which Job had arrived. With new awareness, he understood that he was attempting to reduce the infinite, eternal God into the limited confines of his finite mind, and such a reduction is impossible. God, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, is too vast, too immense, and too expansive to fit into the confined space between our ears. Job 26 contains Job's fiery response to Bildad's final speech in the previous chapter. It's a marvelous extolling of the greatness of God's power in creation and providence as he rules over life and death, heaven and earth. God exceeds our limited capacity to grasp who he is. Job chided Bildad and his friends for their shallow counsel that was grounded in a restricted view of God. This is Job's longest speech. It goes for 6 chapters. It includes chapter 26 through chapter 31. Job professes his faith in God, his Creator, and begins to see his real problem. Now let's look at chapter 26, verse 1 through 3. But Job answered and said, How hast thou helped him that is without power? How hast thou the arm that hath no strength? How hast thou counseled him that hath no wisdom? And how hast thou plentifully declared the thing as it is? In other words, Bildad, you don't have an answer for me. Zophar, you don't have an answer. Eliphaz, your answers didn't help me. You all had a lot of talk, but no real answers. They all have said many things that were good, but they were of no direct meaning, nor did they communicate anything to Job. Because none of them could answer the question of the why of Job's suffering. Verse 4, To whom hast thou uttered words, and whose spirit came from thee? So finally, Bildad, you come up with the right question. To whom hast thou uttered words? But you have no answer. So who has been helped by all this talk? Now Job really launches into his discourse. In it, he'll lay his soul bare. He has a lot to say, and some of it is really great. He moves into the area of the creation and God as the Creator. Verse 5 through 7. Dead things are formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. Much has been made of the fact that he stretcheth out the north over the empty place. Folks have attempted to point out that there's a void in the northern sky, that there is no stars in a certain place in the north. In fact, it was called a hole in the north. However, since we've had these very powerful telescopes, and especially the radio telescopes, we find that we cannot point a telescope in any direction in God's universe without finding it filled with stars, other solar systems or universes. Job is saying that God reached out in space and covered it. He can cover the empty spaces. Also, space is a creation of God. Here's one star which God has created over here. And billions of light years over yonder is another star. And God also has created that one. What keeps them from rubbing together or banging into each other like cars do on the freeway today? Well, God put space between them. What is space? Maybe some people would answer, nothing. Well, brothers and sisters, it is something. I don't know what it is, but it's something, and God created it to hold heavenly bodies apart. It's like a lubricant that he uses to keep the universe from banging into each other. Verses 8 through 10. He bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under him. He holdeth back the face of his throne, and spreadeth his cloud upon him. He hath compassed the waters with bounds, until the day and night come to an end. Have you ever wondered how many tons of water descend to earth during a heavy rainfall of several hours? How can the clouds suspend so much water in the air? God holdeth back from human view the face of his throne, obscures it because it's too great for mortal eyes. With bounds, this means the rocks and shores of the sea are subscribed, set so that they do not overwhelm the earth until the end of time. Of course, the great flood, the deluge, had already taken place, which means that the book of Job was written after 2349 BC, and certainly written before the law of Moses in 1491 BC. Verse 11, the pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his reproof. Those mountains which by their height and strength may seem to reach and support the heavens, as the poet said of Atlas. Well, this is a poetical book, and there are many poetical expressions in it. These pillars tremble sometimes by the force of earthquakes or by God's glorious appearance in them, as he did at Sinai. Verse 12, he divideth the sea with his power, and by his understanding he smiteth through the proud. By God's power, even the expansive sea is churned up. Job said that even those powers which overpower creation are overpowered by God. Verse 13, by his Spirit he hath garnished the heavens, his hand hath formed the crooked serpent. So by his Holy Spirit, to which the creation of the world is ascribed, he has adorned or beautified the heavens with those glorious lights, the sun and moon and stars. Probably the crooked serpent that Job mentions is a constellation out in the heavens. Verse 14, lo, these are parts of his ways, but how little a portion is heard of him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand? Job is calling attention to the greatness of God as he is revealed in the heavens by his wonderful creation. We see that Job knew God as creator. Job understood him as his redeemer. But Job did not know God as a sustainer and the one who loved him. He did not understand that God would not let anything happen to him unless it would minister to him. Job realizes that the greatness of God is beyond man's capacity to fully understand. God is incomprehensible. Augustine was right. Trying to fit the infinite truth of God into the finite limitation of man's mind is like attempting to fit the Atlantic Ocean into the small hole in the sand. The infinite simply will not fit into the finite. Richard Rowley, born 1300, died 1349, once said he truly knows God perfectly who finds him incomprehensible and unable to be known. That is, the more we learn about God, the more we realize how little we know about him. The Almighty exceeds our greatest thoughts of him, no matter how lofty they may be. Our minds simply cannot conceive it. Maybe we, like Job, stand in absolute awe and utter amazement of this infinite God. May we lower ourselves before him with humility. May we adore and magnify the one who alone is worthy. May we give him the glory due his name. Steve, would you close us in prayer?